yeah, 15 years. 15 years of my life into Ron Tammen. So to just start, as Brian said, it's been 72 years since he disappeared. And yet, isn't it interesting how so many people are still interested in his story? And there's a lot that I'm going to be talking about today that is going to probably be a little surprising to those of you who haven't been to my website. I'm a 1980 graduate. So Ron Tammen would be 91 if he were alive today. He's getting up there, and so am I. So I was a transfer student at Miami. I came in 1978. And so as a result, because I transferred, I was able to go through Fisher Hall before they tore it down in the summer of '78. So I'll be honest, I don't think it made that huge of an impression. I just remember chips of paint, green paint it seemed like. They were talking a lot about ghosts and stuff like that, and that just kind of, okay, you know. But something must have spoken to me, because in 2010, I was kind of at a personal crossroads, and I thought, you know, I'm a writer by trade, but it's scientific stuff, and you have more in you. And so I wanted to write a book, and I decided on Ron Tammen. And so that's what I did. Now, this is his actual signature. How many of you have heard the story of Ron Tammen? Oh my gosh. How many of you have not heard this? Okay, good. All right, this is for you. We're going to be starting from scratch, and then we'll build up to what is new. And let me just say, there's a lot that's new. And as Brian and I were talking about, 15 years of experience of research produces a lot of material. And as I was practicing this, it was taking me like hours to get through this. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk and give you all the stuff that's really the build-up. And then after an hour, if I'm not where I want to be, we're going to skip ahead a little bit, because there are two things that I don't want you to leave without knowing, okay? Okay, but first we have to, I don't think, at least when I was at Miami, they didn't really tell us much about who this guy was, you know? And so I want you to meet the parents. This is Ron Sr. and Marjorie. They had 5 children, and these are his siblings. Sorry if I use Mac, sometimes it doesn't translate well. Okay, so here we have the Tammen children, and what it was almost like they had 2 sets of kids. So we have John is the oldest. He was born in 1932. Ron is the middle kid when they had just 3 sons. He was born January 23rd, 1933, and then Richard in 34. Then, like 8 years go by, and Marcia comes along in 42, and then little Robert. Okay, he came in 45. I love this picture because it really was mostly the Tammen boys, and then this second, the second 2 siblings, or the second set came. But this really tells you who these guys are. So John looks like he's wearing a smoking jacket. I think he's a know-it-all. Okay, and I did talk to John a little bit before he passed away. And he is a know-it-all. He's just, he set the rules. He let me know, we are going to talk in these 3 days, and then you may never talk to me again. It was kind of like that. Richard, who I never did get to talk to, he died early, or in his 60s. He's a hothead. Can you tell by the way he sticks out his, they called him Pee-wee. I have no idea why. No, no, he was short, but he was also always getting into trouble, okay? And then Ronnie, that's what they called him, Ronnie, and he was the nice one. And one of the kids in the neighborhood used to say, if you lined up the Tammen boys everybody would choose Ronnie. Okay, they also had cousins. And I like this picture too because it just shows you they were cool looking guys, right? The Tammen boys, and then Marcia and Robert, and then these two are the cousins. And this is John McCann's. This is Marjorie's brother's children. And they were very, very close. They idolized Ron. And that was one thing that was so clear. Ron, everybody chose Ron. This is their dad, John McCann. And Ron, just as they idolized Ron idolized John McCann. He was a business major at Miami. He got his master's in business. And then in 1950, he was a bond salesman, okay, up until like 1950. But then the Korean War started, and that's when he kind of made a career into the Air Force. And those of you at Miami may recognize that name. He has a scholarship in his name. Okay, and then this is Aunt Mary, and she's one of those aunts that all of us who are aunts aspire to. She was just the go-to. They could call on her. These were very strong people in Ron's life. And here's the house. And you might have seen that address, 21001 Hillgrove Lane, okay? And that's in Maple Heights, which is a suburb of Cleveland. I took this picture in 2011. If you were to Google it, that address, there's no house. So it's kind of eerie. You've got both of the other houses are there, and then it's just a lot. This picture was taken in '63. That is Ron Sr. and Mrs. Tammen, and then Marcia, okay? I'm just going to touch on this a little bit, like right now, and then never again. But Mrs. Tammen is 51 years old there, okay? People didn't age great back then, but that was early, okay? She died 1 year later on this date in 1964. People said it was because of a broken heart. Mrs. Tammen had a drinking problem probably her entire married life. When the kids were kids, she had an alcohol addiction. So yes, she probably died still in grief over Ron. She never gave up, but she died of cirrhosis, yeah, at 52. And honestly, Ron was not a drinker. In fact, he eschewed drink, and that's probably why. Okay, he was like, I mean, this is what everybody talks about, right? He was like the golden boy, you know? And I mean, look at the guy. He looks like Paul Newman, Gene Kelly, he was gorgeous, okay? But also he had talent, he was a musician, he was the president of the National Honor Society, he was smart. Here he is with his brothers. This is the science club, so there's John, Ron, and Richard. Here's his date. I got to talk to his prom date. Something that was driving me crazy as soon as I was starting, and I was like, all I wanted to do, I was not trying to solve this. I was trying to fill in the blanks. And so I call all his, people, this is 10, 12 years ago, and just saying, hey, tell me all about him. And I'm talking to his roommate and, people that you think, oh, sure, there's finally. And they'd all say, he was nice. He was really smart. He studied a lot. And I'd say, well, what was so nice about him? Well, I didn't really know him that well. That's what they tell me. And so once you go through about 20 of those conversations, you know exactly who this person is. He's intensely private. That was it. That is who he was. But the person that could tell me more was John, okay, because they knew each other the longest. And John told me some stories that was like, okay, then I started really understanding. Yes, intensely private. The thing that really dominated Ron Tammen's life was money. And that's not, that's not flattering. But his brother told me, Jenny, he was a hustler. He was always looking for ways to earn money. And I think part of the issue was they were depression kids, and he said, yeah, we were poor. We were very poor. And I'm like, well, yeah, but everybody was. And he goes, Jenny, we were hungry poor. Yeah. I've read in articles, long after the fact where they said that they were wealthy. Wrong. They were not a wealthy family at all. And so what John and Ron and Richard would do was they were earning money as quickly, as early as possible. So of course they had newspaper routes. But Ron was caddying at the age of 11, and they weren't socking away the money. They were adding it to the family, that's the food budget, okay? Never left him. So I think once that seed is planted, it never leaves you. So he was always looking for ways to earn money. Probably in high school, Mr. Tammen sat down the boys. They probably each had their little time for their convo. And he said, I will support you up through high school. But once you're out of high school, you're on your own. If you want to go to college, it's you. This is all on you, okay? And that's exactly what he said to the boys. Ron, thankfully, with all his caddying experience, he did get a scholarship with the Golf Association, the Cleveland Golf Association. It was a caddy scholarship. So that would help him through. Is this ringing bells for people, or? Yeah. Okay. 1952-53. This is the year that we're most concerned about, right? What's going on? Ron was a sophomore business major at Miami, just like his uncle. He wanted to be a bond salesman, okay? What else was he up to? He was a resident counselor in Fisher Hall, and they call them RAs now. It's a prestigious, responsible position. Fisher Hall was in that day, there was a day when it was beautiful and fabulous, okay? And it was a women's college. Yes, it became an asylum, as people like to say. It was actually called Oxford Retreat, so it sounds a little more beautiful, but it was a hospital for people with mental health issues, as well as addictions, things like that. It also became, during World War II, the naval trainees came to learn Morse code. So it's got this long storied history, and it was a little bit on the shabby side. By the time Ron was there, it was shabby, and they closed it down, the second and third floors, by 1958. He just disappeared in 53. So that's, it was not in great condition. They kept the first floor. They had the theater on the first floor, but they blockaded off second and third. Okay, something that some of you may not realize was Ron was struggling. Did you know, does that surprise anybody? That he was struggling financially and with his grades. See, that surprised me because everything that everybody was telling me, oh my gosh, the Delta Ta Delta, he was in Campus Al's, he was a wrestler, he was a resident counselor, it was all beautiful. This golden child, right? And they talked about how smart he was. And this is the university, by the way. Oh, his grades are great. His grades, fantastic. And he doesn't seem to have any financial problems. Wrong. Because here are his transcripts from his sophomore year. All right, a lot of info in here. When Ron came back from his freshman year, he did great his freshman year. Okay, he had done 17 credit hours per semester, so he has 34 credit hours, and he's got a 3.205 GPA. I like how they add that 0.5. I was adding those little 0.5s to mine as well. But he's got a solid B, and that's really super duper. He comes in sophomore year. You guys seeing this? Oopsie. I'm klutzy. I know, I know, right? These A's and B's, those are sections. Those are not grades. All right, these are the grades. Yeah, see what I mean? Okay, so he comes in, he's got 5 plus 12, he's got 17 credit hours that he's starting. He's ambitious. But what happens? He withdraws from 6 hours. He's withdrawn from 6 hours. He's got 11 hours. That's, he's not a full-time student anymore. That's the first semester, okay? Here's the semester that he disappears. He's got 15 hours. That is considered full-time. But he withdraws from what? Psychology. Okay, some of you guys, I think, are figuring this all out. So he withdraws from psychology. The rest are incompletes. So he had withdrawn from psychology before he disappeared. Okay? Why is he juggling so much? I think it has to do with his scholarship. Okay, so and I've gotten this from somebody who had one of those scholarships. You had to have a B average. Okay, you couldn't bring in C's. So he's juggling his grades to keep that scholarship because it's all on him. The problem is, by being a part-time student, which nobody said, right? Nobody said this in the news. All of a sudden, these kids, the guys, were on deferment, okay? Right? Korea's going on. And so he had to be a full-time student to get that deferment. And so all of a sudden, the juggling, I mean, imagine what he's going through, okay? And in addition, he's juggling his finances. So he's bringing in money. Now that he is a resident counselor, that helps with tuition. He's now is a campus owl. He wasn't that in his freshman year. He's a campus owl. That's good money. And yet, he's taken out loans to pay other bills, all right? It's the borrow from Peter to pay Paul kind of money management system, and it's going to take you underwater. And so that was going on. All right. Sorry about that. That looks weird. Let's talk about April 19th, 1953. Okay, Ron's roommate was Chuck Finley. And Chuck was a super nice guy. And he was away for the weekend. He was in Dayton visiting his folks. And when he came back, according to Carl Knox's notes, 10:30 on Sunday night. And this is what he found. And these are the things that you all can probably reel off to me, right? Anybody who is familiar with the story. The door of the room is open. The lights are on. I have seen in some places where the radio was on too. I don't know if you remember that. Maybe. A book is open on Ron's desk. Wallet, IDs, car keys, all left in the desk. His car is parked outside. That's prized possession. And then his string bass, his other prized possession, his money maker, as his brother called it, is in the back seat. Okay? So Chuck comes back, and it looks like Ron's going to return any minute. Okay? And he doesn't think anything of it. But then he goes to bed, and Ron's still not there. Okay, well, maybe he's at the fraternity house. I don't know. He wakes up, still no Ron. And by the way, they didn't know each other that well. Chuck, you know, he's like, yeah, we didn't talk much. So he's off to class, and he runs into Richard. I got that on a good source on that one, that he ran into Richard and said, hey, do you know where your brother is? And he's like, no, I don't know. So then he goes to class. He goes to the fraternity, and he says, does anybody have you seen Ron? No, we haven't seen Ron. Comes back, later that night they have a counselor meeting, okay? And at the counselor meeting, you're required to be there, and he says, yeah, I haven't seen Ron since like the weekend. I haven't seen him since Friday, since I left. That's when everything got put into motion, okay? So the head of the counselors, all of a sudden they start notifying the folks, they start notifying law enforcement, and everybody starts getting involved. And on Saturday, April 25th, they did about 400 students searched all around Fisher Hall. This is Fisher. And no Ron. And then on the Sunday, in an article, it said 3,000 acres, which is a lot, because I think it was like 40 people looking. These are model prisoners or something from in the Houston Woods area, and they were searching Houston Woods. Again, nothing. Now, before I turn this, I just want you to see Fisher Hall because this is a real good photo, I think. This is the north wing. It was shaped like a T, okay? Shaped like a T. Here's the north wing, and then the south entrance is, which you can't see it because of the bush, but that's where the south, and that's the main entrance. We're looking at the east entrance, and then that mirrors the west entrance, which is where Ron and Chuck lived. They were on in the west wing, off to the right at the very end. Okay, many theories were proposed. Oh, let's see. So there was the guy's down in the basement. He hears a noise. He goes down to check the noise. The noise is in the basement, and it's two guys jump him, and heaven knows what happens, okay? That actually came from a psychic. They brought in a psychic. They might have done a couple of times, brought in psychics, and one of the psychics said, well, he heard a noise. I should tell you that the FBI actually has been kind of sort of spreading that. He heard a noise kind of thing. They sent me a document with a narrative that said he heard a noise, and I'm thinking, how do you know he heard a noise? He didn't tell anybody he heard a noise. Okay. Okay, he was target of a mafia hit. You hear this one? And when Ron, before he disappeared, he had gone down to get sheets, you'll see in the timeline, and the reason he had to get sheets was because someone had put a fish in his bed. Did you know this? Somebody put a fish in his bed. And so people thought, well, oh, so a mob guy said, you're going to be sleeping with the fishes. Okay, this is Mr. Tammen's. Mr. Tammen thought, well, he was home the week before he disappeared, and the Campus Owls had been playing at John Carroll University, and so he decided, well, he must have heard something that he shouldn't have heard, and somebody came down and got him. Yeah, I mean, I know you've heard this one, right? That he got a girl pregnant and ran away, okay? And we'll discuss why we think that or thought that, why it was a popular theory. Or he jumped into a body, maybe he committed suicide. He jumped into lake, river, whatever, drowned. That's another one. Or he was abducted, okay, as a fraternity prank and driven to 7 Mile. And the reason, who's got the 7 Mile hat on it? Yeah, driven to 7 Mile and left and told to find your way back home. That was also very popular. But the one that got traction and the one that the university felt was true was that Ron Tammen had amnesia, okay? Right? They started planting the seed on Friday, so he wasn't even gone a week yet. And on Friday, the Dean Knox, is saying, I think he had amnesia. We think he had an attack of amnesia. And they said the same thing to the Cleveland Plain Dealer. And the Plain Dealer at least asked, well, what do you got to back that up? And he said, I got nothing. So he said, so he had nothing to back that up, right? Sorry if this is hard to read. By Sunday, April 26th, yeah, we've got headlines. The amnesia theory is stronger. And on April 28th, Tuesday, were interviewing an expert on amnesia. And that expert on amnesia happens to be the department chair of the psychology department. And that's Everett Patton. And he describes, I'll show you, he describes what kind of amnesia he suspects, but he does say it's not, you don't get it from studying too hard, okay, because that's what, yeah, heaven forbid. So, yeah, he had to put that to bed. But did he think Ron had amnesia? He most definitely thought that, this expert. Okay, investigators. So Carl Knox, I mentioned him. He is the Dean of Men, and he's the one who was put in charge of the entire operation, the investigation. It's brand new, by the way, okay? This is April of 53. He started his job in 52. And likely it was September of 52, the fall of 52. So that semester. Oscar Decker is the Oxford police chief, also brand new. He started his job in March of 53. Yeah. He had been in Hamilton, but so he was still seasoned, but yeah, new in his job. And then, of course, we got J. Edgar Hoover. Because guess what? The FBI, famously, they always say, we do not investigate missing person cases. We don't. And they said that in the paper. But there were 3 ways that they got involved. First, Marjorie Tammen had called in that Ron's missing. And so they did pull together a missing person document. The Cleveland field office, sent it to headquarters, and headquarters agreed to keep this missing person case. So that's one. Then Ron's draft deferment, when that came up, expired because he wasn't filling out the proper paperwork because he's missing. So as a result, once he did not report, they opened up a selective service case. Okay, that was opened in 53, probably around August of 53. This is the one that's, can you read that? Probably not. Off the books. It happens that, again, they don't investigate missing person cases, but they had somebody, this is a Plain Dealer article from June, that Dean Carl Knox told the boys' parents that the FBI had been called into faculty conferences. You know, called into faculty conferences. Well, I have a theory on that. As it so happens, he was a Miami grad, and his parents lived in Oxford, Ohio, and his name was Richard Hunsinger. When he retired from the FBI, he was way up high in the administrative division. My thinking is he was probably, when he comes home to see his parents, he probably did this too. He probably sat in on these meetings. His mother was Leah Hunsinger, and she worked at the Oxford National Bank. And they had interest in Tammen as well, because that's where Tammen banked. So that's my guess. Okay. So the FBI had something going for it. And that was Ron Tammen's fingerprints were at the FBI. They had them. And it's crazy and fluky how it happened. He was in the 2nd grade. It was 1941. He's in the 2nd grade, and they're living in Fairview Village. The Tammens jumped around a lot before they moved into the Hillgrove house, especially during those early Depression years, okay? He's in the 2nd grade, and it just so happens that the police chief there was really he was a big proponent of universal screening, screen those, or do the fingerprints, and then send them off to the FBI. And Ron, serendipitously, happened to be in the 2nd grade when they did that. Neither of the other Tammen boys had their fingerprints taken. So they have Tammen's prints. So you'd think, this is going to be awesome. It would be no problem to find him, right? Because that's what J. Edgar Hoover always said. Well, we're going to say more about those prints. All right. Okay, does anybody know Gilson Wright? Does anybody, okay. Is he a friend? Is he a friend? Okay. Because I have to give, disclaimer here. Look, I'm sorry if I say something that would offend you if you were a friend of Gilson Wright. He's not a bad person. I'm sure he was a great guy, and I'm sure he did good, solid journalism. But he's got the biggest conflict of interest ever. I don't think they'd ever do this at the university anymore, where they've got, okay, he's teaching journalism courses. He's advisor to the Miami Student, that's fine, all good. Director of the News Bureau, that's the person who I did it, not at Miami, but you deal with the press, and that you're sending out press releases, they call, you get them an interview, that kind of stuff. That's what they do. This is the thing that he was doing that is the biggest conflict of interest, and that is he's the stringer, on-call correspondent for all the area newspapers in Hamilton, Dayton, Cincinnati, probably Middletown, SCADs, okay? He's writing all the news on the university. And that's fine if we're talking about kids getting scholarships or kids getting a new job or a new program at the university, that's fine. But when you're talking about a missing kid, and this person has to do interviews with who? His boss, his boss's boss. And if they should say something that all of a sudden they say, let's keep this out, okay? I don't want this to get out. I would suspect, and I have proof that he did, that he's going to obey, right? If somebody says that to somebody like me, no. That is like a lit, that's like the airport lights as to how you continue. If somebody says no to you, or just any roadblocks, thank you very much. If they lie to you, if you catch them in a lie, oh, thank you, because that's where we're going to go. So he was not the right person to do this reporting. Murray Seeger was with the Plain Dealer. He didn't do much. By the way, I'm including him because he was actually a famous guy. He went on to the New York Times, LA Times, but he did write one article about Tammen, okay, that with a byline. And it was a good article. So I'm just throwing this out there to show you what the real reporters were doing. This is your real reporter. Does everybody know this person? Do you know this name? Yes. Okay. He was the one that was doing it. And for 20 years, 23 years, he was doing it. And he was unearthing new details. And honestly, I am still reaping the benefits of Joe Cella's reporting. And I will show you how, because it's so, again, serendipitous how some of this stuff works out. But he was finding things out that I'm learning new things because of him. Okay. This is the timeline. How are we doing on time?
22.
Okay, great. This is the timeline according to Carl Knox. Yeah, you guys watch Dateline, right? You should. So you can see that I've just taken his stuff and created one note. But basically, 3 to 4 on Sunday, that's as early as he's got. He's studying psychology. Thank you. I was wondering. Yeah, we're going to talk about that. So around 7 o'clock, he's in room 212, Fisher. All right, and he's helping this guy, Dick Titus, study. Dick is one of his freshman charges. All right, 8 o'clock, Mrs. Todd Hunter, who's the manager of Fisher Hall, says that he came down and he got sheets because of that fish in the bed, okay? The reason for the fish, as I said, somebody put it in, it's Dick Titus. Dick Titus put it there. Okay, he told me. And they had this thing going where they used to prank each other. Okay, so it was not the mob, all right? And then 8 o'clock and then 10:30. He's got this wide open, gap as to what was going on between 8 and 10:30. And then at 10:30, that's when Chuck comes home. Okay, so wow. But you brought up the funny thing. Why is he studying psych if he dropped the course before? Why? Okay, we're going to talk a lot about that. All right, possible sightings. On June 20th, so 2 months after he went missing, Gilson Wright wrote an article. Gilson Wright's articles pretty much were identical. There was no new information coming in. So it was just, hey, here's his picture, nothing's happened. That was the news. This woman, Clara Spivey, who's in 7 Mile, says, oh, he came to my door. I recognize this guy. I didn't realize, she hadn't known about it in April, but, in June, it's like, oh, he came to my door. And she could date stamp it because the bus, they talked about, he was confused, he had a smudge, whoever it was. I'm not saying it's Ron, but this person at her door was smudgy. He was confused, he didn't know where, if I go over there, and she directed him to the bus stop. Well, then afterwards she finds out, oh, the bus stopped that, they discontinued that route, I feel kind of bad, that kind of thing, but it helped date stamp, so April 19th. Oscar Decker loved this. He promoted it widely. So June 29th, as you will soon see, all these articles came out that, Mrs. Spivey saw him, and that just confirms the amnesia theory. Okay? However, there was another person who claims to have seen him. Are these names ringing bells at all? Okay, this is H.H. Stevenson. He was the director of student housing and student employment for housing. Those residence counselors, they would interview with him, right? He also issued car permits. Ron Tammen had a car permit. He'd have to go through H.H. Stevenson for that. He also oversaw loans through housing. Ron Tammen probably met with him at least 3 times, possibly more. He knew him. So he's coming back from vacation, and their vacation was on, the date was August 5th when they were coming back, and in Wellsville, New York, which sounds like it's out of the way. I've been there. It was on this is pre-interstate, so it was kind of a main highway kind of thing. And they stopped in at an inn or a restaurant that was also a hotel. And he's sitting down with his wife, and he swears he sees Ron Tammen. And they have this moment, when you're like staring at somebody and they're staring back and that kind of thing. They look familiar, that kind of thing. He said that he was staring at me, almost staring through me, okay? But crazily enough, he didn't say anything. He didn't go up and say something. And so he leaves with his wife and tells her, like, I swear I saw Ron Tammen. And she's like, why are you, get back in there. And he goes back in, and they're gone. The men are gone, young men. Did I say that he was sitting with young men? He was sitting with young men, okay? Several young men. He comes back to work the next day, and he tells, I'm going to say he saw, it was Carl Knox, because their offices, he's in 106 Benton Hall, and Carl Knox was in 103. And so, for sure, he told him. What did they do? Did that hit the papers? No. They didn't tell anybody. Nothing happened. This is a guy that knows him. So there are things you can do, even if it's just so wildly not possible. you still chase it down. You know, people were looking for him. So you could find out what was the name of the establishment, find out if they wrote a check, all those things. Lots of things you can do. Nothing. We found out because of who? Joe Sella. He brought it out in 1976. Okay. All right, another Joe Sella article. This is the one that I'm reaping great benefits from. Yes, I figured you guys would know him. Did everybody go to Doc Boone? Here's the thing, he was the coroner, yes, but he was also a family physician, right? So everybody makes a big deal of, why would he go to the coroner? So what happened was, in 1973, and it was April 23rd, 1973, Joe breaks the news that Doc Boone had been to the university back when, in 53, because he recognized Ron Tammen. Ron Tammen had showed up at his door, at his office, and he wanted his blood type test, right? And Doc Boone said, why do you want that? You're the first person in all my years. Why do you want a blood type test? And Ron said, well, you never know if you're going to need to give blood one of these days. That was, and it sounded weird. And Doc Boone might be right. He thought this could be part of the case. And so he looked, found Ron's card, medical card, took it to the university. And I don't know if you can read this, but most of this article is talking about how the university was not having it. They did not have any interest in hearing from Doc Boone. Always discounted. They didn't want to discuss the case. I feel like definitely got the brush off. In the 1976 documentary, he said, we exchanged sharp words. I mean, here is this respected, this is an elected official for Butler County. He shows up with evidence, and he's being, dismissed, right? So what is that about? Okay. Now it's page 2 that really I was loving. It's because, so Joe Sella used to carry Ron Tammen's photo in his wallet, and this was for 20 years he was carrying his photo in his wallet. And I've seen that wallet, and he still has it. Joe Sella has passed away, but his sons have it. Yeah. So I took a picture of it. They printed that photo in his article. On April, and I said this was April 23rd, 1973, when they published this article. On April 23rd, 1973, somebody recognized that person or thought they recognized them, and they called it into the Cincinnati FBI. And they said, I know exactly where this person is. And they sent him they told the Cincinnati FBI, he works at Welco Industries in Blue Ash, okay? I drove by it yesterday. So the Cincinnati FBI followed up on it. They investigated. They went and bothered that guy in Blue Ash, took his prints, and sent them to the FBI. What that has done, keep in mind, by the way, in 73, J. Edgar Hoover is gone now. Okay, he died the year prior. All of a sudden, I think new people are seeing these Ron Tammen's documents for the very first time. And what it did was it injected all new life into those documents, the FBI missing person file for Ron Tammen, and I'm figuring things out based on what they scribbled and what they stamped on those documents. Okay, this is one that you guys have brought up too. In 1953, in June of 53, there was a dead body that was found in a ravine near Lafayette, Georgia. It's spelled Lafayette, but they will correct you. It is Lafayette, okay? And it was around late June when they found the body, and they have no idea who it was. They still don't know who it was, to be honest. Okay, and it was near US 27. See? Yeah, you guys are fast. All right, so what happened was in May of 55, the director of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation wrote to Miami University, to the dean at Miami University. They don't, I'm not sure where it went, to be honest, but saying, we have a dead body down here, 2 years old now, but we got a tip about a Ron Tammen who disappeared, and could you please send us everything you've got on that guy? We want to know if it may be the same person. Okay, 27, exactly. So this is why it's not far-fetched that it might have been him. Here's 27, Fort Wayne to Miami, and it goes straight through Oxford. High Street is 27, and here's Lafayette. Okay, so yeah, it makes perfect sense. And so what I have not seen is any indication that anything happened based on that 1955 letter. If maybe somebody from the university made a phone call, maybe they said, I don't know what they would have said, to be honest, on the phone. But what I would have done, put him in touch with the FBI, because guess what? The FBI has his, yes, you guys are very good. So it would have solved it immediately. Didn't get solved until 2008, when you all were reading about that dead body down in Georgia. Do you remember those articles when they came out? Okay. This is Steve Wilson. He is the sheriff in Walker County, Georgia. And he and his cold case detective, Mike Freeman, were the ones that wanted to solve some of their cold cases. They contacted, do you know Frank Smith? Frank Smith was the cold case detective in Butler County, okay? So they contacted him and hey, we could kill two birds with one stone. I hate that expression. I can't believe I just said it. We could solve two cold cases at the same time, okay? Is our dead body Ron Tammen? And so they were gonna they did exhume the remains of this person who happened to be in an unmarked grave, by the way. Yeah. And then they took Marcia Tammen's, she did a cheek swab, and they compared the DNA, and it wasn't. So they solved the case. Could have been solved earlier, but they solved the case. Now, a couple things that are kind of fun. He is showing us where the dead body was, and it is now, and probably forever will be called, Dead Man's Hollow. Very nice people down there, by the way. This is the engineer, and he was telling me, how do you find remains from an unmarked grave? And here's how you do it. You look for the green patches, because that's where the dead bodies were, right? That's all those nutrients. And then you take one of these pokers, and you poke for whatever, maybe wood that's probably pretty well degraded, but from that long ago. But that's how you do it if you need to. All right, latest findings. How are we doing? 10 till? Oh, that's good, okay. All right, couple disclaimers. One, I've already said things about Gilson Wright that I'm sorry. But look, if you're being told, if you're working and your boss, and you find something out, and your boss says, this never reaches the light of day, no, and it's because of national security or something like that, I get it, it was different back then, okay? So just know that I don't hold grudges against these people. The second thing is that I'm going to be presenting evidence that I'm finding, and I'm also going to be presenting conjecture. And I am trying very hard to make sure you understand which one is which. Sometimes I have to hypothesize just to tie things together, okay? I use the Freedom of Information Act. That is what I do. That is, I submit FOIA requests. That is a federal law, okay? And you can request federal documents. And so I am always bugging the FBI. I have bugged the CIA. They operate on a whole different set of rules. But I do bug a lot of people. And then I also use public records acts. And the state of Ohio has sunshine law. So I can submit requests for documents from public institutions, Miami University being one of them. I get to know people, okay? So I got to know the family. Unfortunately, all the immediate family members are gone now. And it was so hard to lose them, because especially Robert just passed last year. I can't believe I'm getting a little emotional. They cared so much about finding their brother, and it enraged me when I find people who know something and they disregard it. This is a family, and it's 72 years ago. Excuse me, I think we can all forgive whoever if they're still walking around, right? But they all died without knowing. Marcia's the same way. She died about 3 years ago. Here's some people who also died. Sorry. Here's lots of dead. I'm sorry. But these folks were some of my sources. This is a relative, extended relative from my person of interest. He was a baby brother kind of thing. They were young. This guy, he was a cop. He worked for Oscar Decker. And do you guys know Bob Schuette? Okay. So, and he passed away recently. So he was a fraternity brother of Ron's. So you just, anytime you find these folks are here, you jump in the car and you go see him, especially this guy. I mean, he was 97, and I'm like, you know, phew, I'm in the car and I'm down to see him. Of course, you come to the library. I spend countless hours in libraries, archives, historical societies, and that's how I got to know Brian, and that's how we got to talking. I go on a lot of road trips, and I go down a lot of rabbit holes. I mean, if you only knew. Okay, sorry about the lineup of that. It looked good on my computer, I promise. So, the timeline, as we discussed, remember we had 2.5 hours between 8 and 10:30. Huge, okay. My world turned upside down as soon as I talk to this man, okay? And I'm going to play it now, if I can get it. You tell me if he's credible or not. Okay.
Now,
oops, sorry. Okay.
when did you find out? Now, so tell me a little more about, did you ever socialize with him?
No.
Okay.
I didn't. The only times that I really saw him were really at song practices.
Okay.
And he was the leader of the song practice. Are you familiar with the fact in those days we had a Mother's Day program where all the fraternities used to sing a song competitively in Withrow Court?
Okay, no.
That ended before you got there, but that was a major thing. I mean, every fraternity practiced for that. You picked a song, and you had a song leader, and the only guy that could carry a tune or knew anything about music in the Dell House was Ron. Literally, you know. And he'd have a little pitch pipe, and he'd start us off in the right direction, and so on.
Okay.
And the night he disappeared, we had a song practice. You probably know that.
No, I don't. I do not know that.
Oh, okay. Okay, I have looked since I talked to you. I've looked at the websites. I'm not sure which one is yours, but there's some information in some of them that doesn't jive with my memory.
Okay.
And I'll tell you as we go along here. But for example, there's a discussion that he came back to his room at 8:30 at night. Now, if he did that before he came to song practice, because there was a song practice that normally sometimes it started at 9 o'clock at night, sometimes it started at 10 o'clock. Most often it started at 10 because that was the girls' hours.
Okay.
But the girls had to be in the dorms at 10. The song practice in our fraternity started at or maybe 10 minutes after 10. But sometimes, if the guys didn't have a lot of dates and they wanted to go quick, we'd start at 9. I can't remember which was the case that night. I don't know.
But was
I
he?
can't remember.
But you do
if we started
remember?
at 9 or we started at 10.
Do you do remember that he was at practice?
There's no question he did. I walked home with him. There were the two of us, Chip Anderson and myself. When that song practice was over, we had a house chef, a black guy that we used to call Daddy-O. He lived outside of town. And the nights of song practice, he would come in and he'd make hamburgers for the guys before we broke up for the night. So what happened that night was we had the song practice. Daddy-O made hamburgers for us, and when then we all broke up. When we left the house, there's a guy named Chip Anderson, who is now deceased, and myself and Ron walked. At that time, there was a path in front of the Dell House on the far side between the natatorium and Withrow Court, which is gone, by the way. Did you know that?
Yeah, I did.
Withrow Court is gone. That's a heartbreak.
Yeah.
Really, like me. I lived in Withrow Court. But anyway, we walked on that path across what is now the baseball field, right straight across, and came out right by Sims Hall. And Chip and I lived in Sims Hall when we lived in that first door at Sims. We said goodnight to him, and he walked on. And that's as far as we know, Dean Knox told me we were probably the last ones that he knows that saw him.
Really? This is so counter to what, how everybody, actually how it's been reported in the news too, because they basically said between 8 and 9 he probably disappeared and he had gone to get sheets because of the fish.
No, I saw that in the website, back to his room at 8:30.
Yeah.
It's possible that he was back in his room at 8:30, but the point is that if he was there at 8:30, that wasn't in for the night. He had left and come back out to the Dell House to the song practice.
Oh, that's
so
fascinating.
I can't tell you that he didn't come in at 8:30 and then leave, but he definitely did and was not home at 8:30 from the song practice.
Yeah.
There's no question he wasn't back before 10:30.
That was me. It was like, what? So then all of a sudden you see all the stuff that was being said by people who had heard him say, Carl Knox told him, you're probably the last person to see him before he disappeared. And yet, right? Okay. See if I can get this one. Logan Corbin he worked for Oscar Decker. He's going to tell a story. I'm going to cut him off simply for time, but because it was never investigated. This is a clue that was never investigated. And I can do this again. When did you find out about the woman of him talking to a woman or sitting in a car?
I think that next day or so.
Somebody told that he saw Ron Tammen in a car with a woman.
Yeah, but they haven't investigated the person. Nobody knows who the person is sit at. Whether it was a fake deal to cover up or what. But they definitely said that he was in the car. So they saw him in the car about 45 minutes, close to an hour. And then all of a sudden they just drove off.
And they drove off, but we don't know what time.
No, it was late.
When did you find out about? Sorry. Okay. And then I just grill him the whole time, like, what car? What kind of car? Who was the woman? They didn't investigate it. A person sees Ron Tammen in a car with a woman driving off, and they didn't investigate it. So let's just fill in the blanks now. We've got a couple data points. I add this one too. He was in Cincinnati. They were cutting records for at King Records, the campus house. I actually have the recordings. I cannot play them because, copyright and all that. Studying psychology. We don't know why. Then he was helping Dick Titus study, 8 p.m. getting sheets for the bed. And now we can say, okay, He's at song practice. We don't know if it started at 9. We don't know if it started at 10. It doesn't really matter. He's filled in that block, okay? And then somebody sees him. I've added 10:30. What Logan said was it was late. It was late. Okay, so it could have been 11, for all we know. 10:30, Chuck comes back. Ron's gone. All right, so why would they ignore those key, right, clues? And I'm going to add one more. So Gilson Wright is writing articles about Mrs. Spivey. This is June 29th, 1953. Here are just a sampling of 4. And we've got 4 papers, same reporter, 2 arrival times. Hamilton Journal News and the Dayton Daily News have it at 11 o'clock at night. And they attribute it to Mrs. Spivey. And he has other quotes from Mrs. Spivey, so I presume he spoke with Mrs. Spivey. Mrs. Spivey said the youth came to her door about 11 o'clock. These 2, same day, okay, say that, and here he attributes it to Mrs. Spivey, but it's so roundabout. It's not Mrs. Spivey said. Mrs. Spivey remembered last week, blah, blah, blah. It came to her door about midnight. Over here is the big one. Oscar Decker is who it's attributed to. Oscar Decker said that Mrs. Spivey said it was about midnight. Why? Why would you change the time of arrival of a person that might not even be Ron, for all we know? Why would you ignore the walk home? Why would you ignore the woman in the car? I have one word answer for you. Amnesia. It doesn't fit their narrative. It would be too hard to explain, right? Here's the map. Here's the campus map. This is Delta Tau Delta. They make their way. Here's Sims. Here's Fisher. They're about 3 minutes apart. Seriously, so close. Okay? So they're walking home. How difficult would it be to say that he got amnesia somewhere between dropping him off and then going to Fisher, right? It would be easier to say that he got jumped by somebody, right? But I think they also didn't want to put him there. They did not want him anywhere near this because there was somebody that thought they saw him in a car. All of a sudden, other people, if they were keyed in on that location, that might get a lot of people talking. Okay? So, no, we can't have him there. We have to have him in his room. The other thing is, I don't know if you've ever driven from Fisher Hall, now the Markham Center, to 7 Mile, but that's 11 miles. And are any runners here? I would have to be in full-on run to get there in time, and it's hilly. And I don't think, he was on the track team in high school, but I don't think he was running much. So you can't do it in 2.5 hours if you're not, in shape. And I think Oscar Decker thought, we ought to give this guy a little more time to get there. He added an hour. Yeah. All right. And, okay, how are we doing? All right, so, I know. All right, so why the psychology book? The psychology book is critical, all right? Carl Knox thought it was weird, too, because he wrote down the names of 3 people, okay? And Professor Dennison, who was Ron's advisor, and then he wrote down the names of 2 people in the psychology department, Professor Delp, who was an instructor, and he also did some tutoring of business students, and then Switzer, Professor Switzer, okay? He also, thankfully, wrote down habits. Thankfully, he said the book was open to habits. And there is no, I got the book to see, what was he actually reading about. there is no chapter on habits, but because he said habits, that helped me take a 600-page book and whittle it down to 4-page spreads, what it could possibly be that he was reading about. And here's what I figured out. This is my hypothesis, okay? If I figured it's not going to be buried in the text. It's going to be standing out somehow. So I call these section heads, they are in all caps. There were also what I call subheads, and those were not all caps. Those were in just bolded type. But those were the 2 breaks. Because he had habits, all caps, underlined, I'm guessing that he was looking at one of these, okay? And so that let me get rid of at least 1 more page spread. So now I'm at 3 page spreads. Now, this is a picture from 1954 Hamilton Journal News. And this was a Sella article, of course. I am presuming that that is open. This is a big presumption, I know, but I am presuming that it was open to the correct page. The reason being, they said that this was as it was left. They closed down that room was shut, locked, okay? Chuck had to move down the hall or wherever, and then they locked up this room. I also know that Joe Sella was a good reporter, and the Hamilton Journal News is a good paper. And so I would, and so they're going to want an accurate, they don't want a reenactment, they want the right thing. So I am banking on this. Here's what it looks like there are no shadings there. So it doesn't look like photos. I've seen the other 2 spreads, and there are photos, distinctive photos. One's like all the way down, the other one is up in the upper left. There's no photos there that I can tell. I have landed on page 294 and page 295. This is page 294. I think he was reading about 295, which is post-hypnotic suggestion. Yeah, okay. This is where it's going to get weird. This is, and I hope, how are we doing? Is it 1 o'clock? Oh my God. Okay. Well, I'm going to go at 2:30. Is that when everybody has? Okay, we're going to go straight to 2:30, and then I can come back someday. Go, and I have a website. Welcome to go to the website. All right. That's not unheard of. Did you know that Miami University had 3 experts, hypnosis experts, on their faculty in 1953? Yeah. It was, Everett Patton was the department chair. He was a hypnosis expert. St. Clair Switzer, Ron's professor, and then Ted Perrin also. All 3 of these individuals studied under someone named Clark Hull, Hull, who was the preeminent researcher on hypnosis. He had written the book on hypnosis. That's Clark Hull. He was at the University of Wisconsin, and then he moved over to Yale, okay? And Patton studied under him for his bachelor's and master's. St. Clair Switzer started at Wisconsin for his master's, and then he followed him to Yale for his PhD. And then Perrin studied under him. Here's his book, Hypnosis and Suggestibility. It was a 10-year work that included all kinds of experiments on what is hypnosis and what's happening scientifically. What is suggestibility? How does somebody become more suggestible? That kind of thing. And you can see Everett Patton is listed, St. Clair Switzer is listed. That's alphabetically. They would have been up at the top as far as how much they helped, because Patton was helping with the experiments even down here at Miami. Once Hall was at Yale, they wanted him to kind of get out of the hypnosis business and go back to what he was doing, which was learning and behavior, conditioned learning, that kind of thing. St. Clair Switzer was getting his PhD while this book was getting ready for press. And so he was doing all that footwork. So he considered them extremely helpful. All right. Here's another Another reason that I think it's not unheard of that Ron would be reading about post-hypnotic suggestion. And that is based on comments by Everett Patton early. So again, this is that one article that came out April 28th, okay? And in that article, Dr. Patton says, he's talking about, yeah, you can't get it from overstudy. But he does say that if a person is studying a lot, okay, it could be that they're trying to escape their problems, their psychological problems, okay? So he's talking about a person can have amnesia, they can go wandering, they can forget who they are, all right? And the type of person who's doing that is somebody who has a psychological issue, something in their background. What he's describing is a dissociative fugue, and that is extremely rare. This doesn't happen all the time. In fact, you'll see, it's like 2% of the world population would have something like a dissociative fugue, but he's talking pretty like, oh, this happens, you know? He doesn't want to talk about Ron, and the way he says it is he refused to comment on the Tammen case. As somebody who worked with the press, that is something you never want to say to a reporter. I refuse to comment. I mean, you just don't. That just sounds like you know more, right? But then he says, if he is alive, he's probably at some distance from Oxford. So he's saying, yeah, I'm not going to talk about Ron Tammen. I'm going to talk about this hypothetical person who forgets who he is and goes wandering. But then, oh, P.S., Ron, if he's anywhere, he's probably far away from me. He's basically saying, yeah, I think Ron had a dissociative fugue and went wandering. And I know this for a case because something else he said. This was to somebody I spoke with who was a psychology major. He became a psychologist. And he was studying under Patton, so he knew him. He told me that there was an article in the paper about Patton heading up a university panel or something. And they came to a consensus that Ron had some kind of a dissociation. I have looked everywhere for this article, and I cannot find it. But he is a credible source, regardless. He went up to Patton, and he said, yeah, I read that you're leading this panel, and you think he had a dissociation? So this is a person that knows what it is. And he said, yeah, there were things in Ron's background that would be consistent with that. And he said, really? What things? And he said, well, of course I can't comment on that. You know? So, okay, I think I have to do this. I'm sorry. I have to talk a tiny bit about amnesia. Okay, because he's talking about something that is so rare. There are two kinds of amnesia. There's organic amnesia. That's caused by a blow to the head, some disease, some stroke, something that damages the brain. If you get hit on the head, it's not that you're going to forget who you are. You know who you are. But what's happening because of the brain damage is your brain isn't able to sort new memories so that their new memories aren't accessible. This one, psychogenic amnesia, is the psychological thing. So if you've experienced emotional trauma, that is what this is. And it's your brain's way of protecting you, really. Making it inaccessible so you can carry on with your life. That's what happens there. And like I said, extremely rare. I talked to an expert, of course, because I know nothing about this. And he's like, okay, I've been in this. This was about 10 years ago. He said, I've been in this for about 38 years. I can probably point to about 12 people. Okay? So these are not common. Now, there is one other kind, and that's post-hypnotic amnesia. That is amnesia that it's more like the psychogenic because your brain is not damaged, but you are forgetting, and it's because you've been instructed to forget. Has anybody been hypnotized? I was hoping, okay, yeah. No, it's nothing to be ashamed of. I mean, people, yeah, it works for people to cure certain things. But yeah, they tell you to forget what has been said, and they forget, okay? Here's what I think was going on. Article, I pointed to this article before, and it was talking about Houston Woods, blah, blah, blah. Second to the last paragraph, it says this. Parents of 3 other Ohio youths who have disappeared in recent years, but who recovered from their loss of memory, have telephoned to Tammen's parents to encourage them. It was learned here. I mean, are you kidding me? This article is not available online. You cannot find it. And it is what happened, thankfully, somebody cut it out. The kinds of articles that went to microfiche and now digital had to have been the final edition. I've learned about this. This one, thankfully, somebody cut it out. Otherwise, we would have lost it. What is going on? Knowing what we know about dissociative amnesia, we know that it's very rare. And here we have, within the week that Ron disappears, somebody's been able to, boom, boom, boom. I got 3 kids, 3 youths, and let's call the parents over, and we'll call the parents. And yeah, something tells me we're not talking about dissociative amnesia. I think we're talking about post-hypnotic amnesia, right? Because it's the next best thing. And furthermore, I think probably it was Everett Patton that was telling him about this. And okay, I'm going to go say it. Youths from Ohio, this is hypothesis. My guess is it was probably Miami students. I think Ron was being hypnotized when he disappeared. That is my hypothesis. There's so much more to this story. Let's see if I can take you. Yeah, I'm going to take you to the very end, okay? Please come to my website. Because look, I know when they purge when they purge the prints. They purged his prints, but okay, here we go. Yeah, here we go. Breaking news. I found a document at University Archives that indicates that Carl Knox's secretary was had been interviewed interviewed. She was Carl Knox's secretary when Tammen disappeared. Right now, the only thing that remains is this. This is a write-up, okay? And I would love to know if anything from that interview exists. I'd love to see it or hear it. If not, I'd like to know who did it. Okay, this is all I'm going to be able to say. Breaking news. I'm attempting to obtain records that may be pertinent to the case from Miami University. I filed a writ of mandamus against Miami University on December 31st, 2023 at the Court of Common Pleas of Butler County, Ohio. Miami University filed a motion to dismiss the case. Their motion was denied. We are currently in the discovery period. We're still waiting for information about how the university creates and maintains these records, and we're scheduled for a deposition of a university representative on May 14th. And that is all I'm allowed to say from my lawyer. Okay, and now I have to show you this because here's the scrawls that I was telling you about, all the scribbles and scrawls, and I think many of these were made after 1973 when Joe Sella wrote that article and they got called in. And the thing that I want to show you, because James McCord has matching stamps to Ron Tammen. Do you remember James McCord? Yeah, they've got matching stamps. Here's another scribbles, all these things. This is the one. This thing. And I've been looking at it for I'm embarrassed. I got these in 2010, and it was last summer, so 14 years. I had these. And then I was like, that looks like it says C index. I believe Ron Tammen was on the FBI's security index. This is huge. It's huge. And it's vindicating. Okay, this tells me, oh, okay, we're on the right track. Something happened. They were watching Ron. The security index for the FBI was, it was designed for people who they felt were dangerous or some kind of a national threat. This is nice. Remember nice Ron, responsible Ron, national threat. Okay, so, and if you see some of the people we have, let's see, this is Stanley David Levison, Charles Manson. Everybody know Charles Manson? Okay, here's a couple spies. They were on the security index. The whole point was for them to keep track of these people so that when, if a national emergency, they'd know where to find them. The whole thing. If they're not doing that for a missing person because they wouldn't know where to find them. If they didn't know, they knew. They knew where Ron Tammen was. Yeah, yes. So these are how you do it, how you get, they're keeping track. They fill out an FD 122 form, and then the Department of Justice approves it, so they know. And I have other marks that look like, oh, the Department of Justice got 2 copies here. Yeah. And then they maintain these records, and then they update them like a couple times a year. So they know I know now. So I've been, of course, saying, okay, I see that I wrote to the Department of Justice, and I'm like, okay, send me his FD 122, s'il vous plaît. And they're like, you have to show us proof that he is dead, and I don't have that. Yeah. I mean, I can say I do, but okay. And so here's why I think C index means security index, and that is because I have FD 122s and then C index. These are different, but they say verification of security index cards and C index. So you can see that if you've got C index written, there is backup documentation. Yeah, right? So this is what keeps me going. And here's Stanley Levison with his C index, and that's on his FD 122. So, and when was he added? I believe, here is Hank Greenspun. He was a publisher of the Las Vegas Sun, but he was kind of ornery in his own right. He's got C index written there. To me, do those look like similar handwriting? Yeah. I'm no expert, but that looks similar. So this was written in July of '73. I'm thinking that's, again, thank you, Joe Sella, for that article, because I think that's when they wrote up his. All right, so I think we're going to close. Summary. Who do you think knew? Who do you think knew something? They didn't have to know everything, but I think you've seen some people that know something enough. I haven't even talked about large numbers of other parts of this case. So, did anybody work at Champion Paper by any chance? Okay. Anybody know Dorothy Craig? Dorothy Craig? Okay, she was a scheduler. Okay, that's a huge part of my thing. Maybe go to my website, and I'd love to talk to anybody Dorothy was great. Dorothy was a great person. I think she wrote a check to Ron Tammen before he disappeared. So yeah, lots and lots. Do you have any questions? Yes.
When I spoke with you,
yeah.
You said you were going to tell me what happened. The FBI. You lost me a long time ago.
Okay.
Is he dead or alive?
Is he dead or alive? I think he's dead. I think the reason I got his FBI documents at the beginning was because he was gone. Exactly. They never asked me for third-party authorization or anything like that. Now, I'm so sorry that I didn't get to this, but when they had his fingerprints, and they purged his fingerprints in 2002. And that I chased down. And I turned in the FBI. I found out how long they were supposed to keep those fingerprints. They were supposed to keep them for 99 years. If that person was 99 years. In 2002, that's how long they were supposed to keep them. They purged them 30 years too soon. And so I turned them in. I wrote to, there's a place at the National Archives you can turn people in. and that's what I did. 1 month later, they came back and said, oh no, they're fine. They could do it based on this schedule, and it had to do with the Privacy Act. Okay, so the Privacy Act protects us from them using our personal data, all right? And so you can ask, if you feel that an agency like the FBI has something that they shouldn't have, you can ask them to expunge it, and only you can ask that. The sole purpose to ask, yeah. Now, it was also a court order was a possibility, and I ruled that out. I contacted the Attorney General. I think it was the Privacy Act, okay? Which means Ron Tammen was probably alive in 2002. He's the one who asked for those prints to be expunged. He's alive in 2002. I think he died in by 2010, so it was within that time period.
He would have been living in the United States.
I don't know that. I don't know that.
I mean, I know Joe Sella dedicated a lot of his life.
Yes, yeah. I mean, and I'm still trying to figure out, because
Only sloppy police work.
there was sloppy police. Yes, there was sloppy police work. My latest write-up has to do with the JFK. Some of the people that have the same stamps as Ron are tied to the JFK assassination, you know, all the investigation, okay, there. And so I was digging through that, and I found some interesting stuff there. And a lot of the people with the same stamp, same scribbles were Cubans, Cuban exiles, or so he may have been somehow tied to Cuba. I don't know. Or mobsters who did work in Cuba. Santo Traficante. They have the same, you know, Ron has a bunch of 10s on top of his documents. Santo Traficante has 10s. That's the kind of thing I'm doing right now, is trying to tie these things together. Yeah.
So you believe he was alive?
No, I think he knew. That's a great question. Yeah, I think.
Reach out to his family or?
No, he didn't. I think he was probably employed by the CIA. Yeah, that's the other thing. St. Clair Switzer, I have documents where he was, I believe, it's all redacted, approached by the CIA during MKUltra and Project Artichoke. Okay, so I believe that is how he got driven off of campus. What he was doing, I think he was employed by CIA. Yeah. No.
How would he have financial trouble?
That was late. That was earlier. I think his finances were fixed. Yeah. I think they gave him a new name, new social. Yeah. His social security number was never used again. Yeah. I'm sorry. I wish I could have told more. There's so much.
So was he a bad guy?
That's a great, super great question. Was he a bad guy, or was he was he a spy, a super spy? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I hate to think of him as a bad guy.
Good looks. Could he not have been a Bond guy?
Yeah, he could have been a bad guy.
What was the connect of the lady from Champion writing a check?
Yeah.
Recap that. And,
yeah.
Is that from the building that's to be renovated?
Is that the administration building?
Administration.
Yeah, she was in that building. She, up in one of Carl Knox's notes, it has Oxford National, Dorothy Craig, where was it cached? Which is our clue that Dorothy Craig had written a check to Ron Tammen. But Dorothy Craig was a scheduler. She went to church. That was basically what she did after work hours. She went to church. And she had a lovely family, and it just seemed weird. And they couldn't understand, why is she banking at Oxford National if she lives in Hamilton? And so that's what I've been trying to chase down. Champion paper, just in a word, I've learned so much about it. And they are, Reuben Robertson Jr., did you know that guy? Was awesome. I understand he was awesome. And he died far, far too soon, but he was very political. They used to hire former joint chairs of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Secretary of the Army, CIA. That's how I got onto it. They had a guy from the CIA who retired in Hamilton, Ohio, and worked for Champion Paper. I'm thinking, what's going on at Champion Paper? I wonder, my thesis hypothesis is, because they were very community-oriented as well, somebody may have gone to them and said, hey, we've got this project. I think Ron was being hypnotized, and I think St. Clair Switzer was doing it. And we've got this project, it's national security. And by the way, St. Clair Switzer was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, all while he was a professor. And so that would have made inroads with them too. And so I think they may have said, hey, could you support our work? And let's use Dorothy Craig as our little go-between. I don't know. I'm still trying to dig that one up. But if you know anybody, that during that era or something, I'd love to talk to them. Yeah. I think I've kept you so long, and I apologize. But thank you. Thanks.